Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 2, Static IP Configuration. In the AskMisterWizard.com movie entitled Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 1, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, you learn that every time you connect a computer or router to the Internet, you will be expected to provide important details describing your immediate pathway out to the rest of the world. 4 items of information will almost always be required. 104, your IP address. 204, a net mask indicating the size of your local IP subnet. 304, the IP address of your subnet's default gateway. And 404, the IP address of an available domain name server. If you haven't already seen that Part 1 movie, then you really ought to watch it before proceeding here, because this movie builds on those concepts. The methods by which your computers and equipment learn their IP configuration details fall into 2 broad categories as follows. 1 of 2, they can be automatically configured with a dynamic IP address, or 2 of 2, they can be manually configured with a static IP address. Most people start out using the first of these options, resulting in dynamic IP addresses, as described in Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 1. Later, as they become more experienced and as they activate increasingly sophisticated services, it is commonplace to configure some of their equipment with static IP addresses. Where that Part 1 movie relied on the automated DHCP protocol to configure your Internet connection, this new Part 2 movie will show you how to learn and configure the specific values that you might want to use for more advanced services. We will use Microsoft's popular Windows XP operating system as the basis for most of the illustrated dialogues and menus. Although routers or computers using other operating systems will not look exactly like Windows XP, most of them will use the same vocabulary and request the same information in substantially the same way. The general principles of router management are described in the AskMisterWizard.com movie entitled Managing Your Network Equipment with Your Web Browser. If you haven't seen that movie yet, you should watch it now, and you should use those principles to learn and write down the values your NAT router has set up for local static IP addresses, netmask, default gateway, and DNS server or servers in use on your local subnet. You should also learn whether your Internet service provider has provided a dynamic or a static IP address for the external interface of your NAT router. In all probability, this will be a dynamic IP address unless you have paid extra fees to your ISP. The value of a stable IP address. Every computer in your home office or small office network that uses the Internet will need an IP address from a group of private local IP addresses that are all managed by your NAT router. Your local NAT router is probably configured to manage a group of 256 private local IP addresses. The usual arrangement allocates the lowest and highest address numbers of that block for various special IP situations, and your router will also consume 1 address. This leaves 253 more private local IP addresses for general purpose work. For most computer situations, all of those 253 addresses are equally effective. Most computers don't care which of those addresses is allocated. In fact, for most computers, it's okay to receive a different IP address every time it is powered up. Those computers are fully compatible with the DHCP mechanism documented in the prior movie from this series. Some computers or pieces of network equipment, however, host communicating services that are seriously inconvenienced whenever the IP address changes, because other computers operating as their clients might want to send them unsolicited IP messages at any time. Those client computers will need to know the IP address in advance, so the situation is greatly improved when a stable IP address can be advertised among the interested community. In general, we refer to these more sophisticated computers as servers or server hosts. Print servers, file servers, game servers, like the sophisticated multiplayer flight simulator setup shown here, telephony servers, mail servers, web servers, and FTP servers all fall into this category. If the associated services are to be offered locally, then a stable local or private IP address will be needed from the subnet managed by your local NAT router. This is often the situation with print servers or file servers. In this movie, we'll show you how to configure your local computers and local servers with stable local IP addresses to facilitate these situations. On the other hand, if you want to offer services on the worldwide Internet, then a stable Internet address will be needed from your Internet service provider. This is often the situation with game servers, web servers, or Internet voice servers. Usually, this situation is best handled through a system that has come to be known as Dynamic DNS. You can learn more about Dynamic DNS in other movies from AskMisterWizard.com. Configuration example using Windows XP. Let's use Microsoft's well-known Windows XP operating system as an example to show how to configure a local static Internet connection. From the Control Panel facility, select Network and Internet Connections. From there, click on Network Connections. That will result in a frame like this, showing a list of all of your network interfaces. Click on the icon representing the network interface that you want to configure with an IP address. Usually, it will have a name like Local Area Connection. If your computer has only one network interface, then the list will show only that single entry. Double-click on it. A new frame named Local Area Connection Properties will appear. That frame will be dominated by a list under a title that says, "This connection uses the following items." From within that list, double-click on Internet Protocol TCP/IP. A new frame named Internet Protocol TCP/IP Properties will appear. From the prominent General tab, select Use the following IP address. 3 edit boxes will be activated. To facilitate your entry of appropriate information in the dotted decimal format discussed earlier, each of these 3 edit boxes is divided into 4 segments separated by dots. In each segment, you are expected to enter a number between 0 and 255. The first of these 3 edit boxes is labeled IP address. Enter the dotted decimal IP address to be assigned to this computer or server. To learn the proper value, consult the notes you made when you used your browser to examine the LAN IP address settings managed by your local NAT router. This will reveal a group of local IP addresses. Select one that is not being used by any of your other computers or servers. Note that your router may be configured to use the DHCP protocol to allocate some addresses from a dynamic address pool. Avoid any of those addresses. Usually, the value you enter will begin with 192.168. The second of the 3 edit boxes is labeled Subnet Mask. Enter the subnet mask representing the size of your local subnet. Usually, this will be 255.255.255.0. The third of the 3 edit boxes is labeled Default Gateway. Enter your router's local IP address here. The first 3 segments will probably be identical with the IP address you specified in the first edit box. Usually, the value of the last digit will be 1. The General tab of the Internet Protocol TCP/IP Properties frame will also display a section for DNS specification. Select Use the following DNS server address and enter the IP addresses of at least one domain name system server hosted by your Internet service provider. That information will be found within the menus displayed by your router. Click OK and then close all of the open frames. Your computer is now configured with a static IP address and has been optimized to support advanced services for access by any of the other computers on your local network. If you want to make your services available on the worldwide Internet, you will need to use port forwarding, as described in our movie entitled NAT Routers Part 3, Port Forwarding, and you will also need to advertise your Internet address somehow. You can either pay extra to your Internet service provider to purchase a static Internet address, or you can use the Dynamic DNS service, as described in other movies here at AskMisterWizard.com. Conclusions. Modern computing equipment can usually be configured to use the IP protocols for Internet access after 4 items are specified. The necessary information can almost always be obtained through a browser interface into the local NAT router. Although it is possible to allow automated procedures to manage these specifications for us, the resulting IP addresses can change from time to time. Some activities, such as server processes, are better handled when we take direct control and configure at least some of our equipment with more permanent values.